Whitechapel, autumn 1888. 5 women are dead. Police patrol every major street. Newspapers scream about monsters stalking London. Citizens form vigilance committees. Doctors debate anatomy. Politicians demand answers. And yet, despite thousands of interviews and one of the largest investigations in Victorian history, one question is barely ever asked. Not who killed them, but why these women? Because sometimes the most important clue in a murder investigation is not found in the killer. It's found in the victims. Welcome back, everybody, to Arkins Hearth. My name is Michael Jason Chandler. Last time, we walked the streets of Whitechapel. We followed the murders, the investigation, the letters, and a few of the suspects, and the birth of one of history's greatest criminal mysteries. Tonight, we're focusing on the victims themselves, because before they became evidence, they were people. Joining me once again are my resident experts in questionable life choices to my left.
Thorin Wolf, owner of Arkins Juice Tavern, Arkins Hearth Gaming, and I'm just happy that I'm a real sound engineer and I'm a real boy and I actually got this thing to work.
Yes, tonight Thorin is a real boy for the first time.
For the first time, I am no longer made of wood. And to my left,
the pixie. I caught my first fish. Guess how big it was. Take a wild guess.
3 inches.
You're not. That's exact. Actually,
That
is exact. Anyways, and to my left,
the ginger. I can casually lift 160 pounds.
God.
You want to know how I found out about this? At my work, we had to do end of period, which is doing inventory for the whole restaurant. I'm not going to tell you which one, but we have these big ass kegs of Bud Light because everyone here drinks Bud Light for whatever reason. And we had to weigh it to see how much was in it. And I picked it up, and I put it on the scale, and it said 160 pounds. I got muscles.
And the pixie has heard this story 3 times today.
No, I started it. You don't say to my left. You just feel left out by not getting to say to my left.
Sometimes.
Okay. Tonight, the name of this episode is going to be Victims, Mistakes, and Missing Murders. This episode is going to cover an idea which seems obvious in the modern world, called victimology. Now, victimology is pretty simple. Who was the victim? Where did they live? Who knew them? What routines did they follow? What risks did they face? What made them vulnerable? But in 1888, victimology barely existed, really didn't exist. As a result, investigators may have overlooked some of the most important clues in this case. Tonight, we're going to examine the women behind the headlines, the assumptions that shaped this investigation, the mistakes that may have narrowed police vision, and the possibility that Jack the Ripper killed more, or perhaps fewer, people than history remembers. This is part 2. Today, when a serial offender appears, investigators immediately begin looking for patterns, specifically among their victims. In 1888, police focused primarily on crime scenes, bodies, wounds, and the killer. The reason I want to do this, and Ginger and I've talked about this a lot, we have always said that we would like to not just aggrandize killers and monsters, but respect the victims as well, that they have families and that they were human beings. So that's a big part of this. I listened to a podcast, and I think I'm going to mention that in this too, the Bad Women podcast, and it changed this whole case for me.
So are we humanizing all the victims tonight?
Right. That's what
absolutely. I love that.
It's all about the victims. It's about talking about what happens when you call them prostitutes, what happens when you don't look at the victimology, and what might have been missed, and this is going to start going into my theory as to who Jack the Ripper probably was, but it's backed up. I've got charts and graphs, man. It's backed up with victimology. So I just wanted to point that out because that's something Ginger and I've talked about in the past, is the importance of recognizing that victims aren't just a part of some monster story.
Well, and I feel strongly about that because, like, Pixie and I, outside of the podcast, we watch and listen to true crime all the time. We try to listen to, like, YouTubers and stuff that do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who is Rotten Mangoes?
She's
Rotten
pretty good.
Mangoes tries really hard to, humanize all the victims and all the cases that she covers. I know that Swoop does similar things. What about Mr. Ballin?
Oh, I love him.
I
He
love
doesn't
Mr.
talk a
Ballin.
lot about, like, murder cases, though. It's more like missing persons cases and stuff like that,
Right.
where there's not, like, a clear reason that the person went missing.
But that's why we've brought up the missing Indigenous people and whatnot. I love true crime, but there's a dark part of true crime that is horrible, and that is the victims. That is what their families go through. But it's also, when you talk about criminology, learning about victims, learning about their families, learning about their homes and where they come from is also the reason so many more get caught now than used to.
And I do want to put in, I feel like a lot of the times, we get too, like, used to hearing about, like, murders and stuff that it just kind of becomes, like, part of the everyday. We get too accustomed to it, I guess. You know what I mean? Desensitized. That's the word I'm looking for. And especially people who, like, watch true crime all the time. It is important to remember that these are real people who actually existed. There are people who were actually affected by this.
And
it's not just a story.
Suffering. Yeah.
Exactly.
Still suffering.
Like, and a lot of times, like, you don't even realize it until something like this happens, like, close to you.
Well, and I could say, so something happened to me yesterday. I'm not going to go into it, but it was something that really, in my world, I found out about some things that bothered me really bad. Some bad things in the world that I had to face. And one thing that I noted was just how deeply it affected me. Like, I read horrible things all the time. I read about horrible people. I mean, literally, it's probably one of my main hobbies is to read about horrible crimes. For everything. I do it just for myself. Like I said, I've studied this case for years. But when it was real for me, when I felt like something was being done to an innocent person, when I felt like somebody had been hurt, I didn't sleep.
Jason didn't call me for like 3 days.
Yeah.
I could not get him on the phone.
I was hyper focused on that. And so, and because it's real, because it makes it real. And it's one of the reasons when we did the Bobby Fry episode, it was very real for me. I cried,
Yeah.
It's just different when it's real, and it's different when it hits. So, we're not trying to make it harder, and I'm not trying to take away the fun of hunting the horrible murderer, but I think it's very interesting. And when I listened to that podcast, The Bad Women, and I read the book, what was really neat was these women stopped being the prostitutes that Jack the Ripper, stalked in the night, and they became far more interesting, far more, and I hope that you'll have that effect as we're going through them, they just became, and that has made this case more real for me, which I think was, important, but it also made me immediately ask some questions, and we're going to get to that. So, as I was saying, police were definitely focused on crime scenes and bodies and wounds and who the killer might be, and that's really understandable because that's all they knew. Remember, we talked about this in the last episode, police had only been around for about 60 years.
It's crazy.
So they focused on what made sense. There's a person. We need to figure out who hurt him. We need to figure out, why this place? Why did they use a weapon? Look at the wounds. Look at the killer. And they were missing a lot of things. That creates a real problem. Because at the time, victims slowly became stereotypes. They just became the person who was victimized. They didn't look at them. They existed, and unfortunately, in a lot of ways, exist to this day as prostitutes in people's minds. And this is debated. I remember when I listened to the podcast, the lady, the historian, the female historian who did the work for the Bad Women podcast said that ripperologists, people who love and study the Jack the Ripper case, were really mean to her. And I know Patricia Cornwell, who also has written a couple of books on her own theories, has dealt with a lot of hate coming from these people who dare to do exactly what I'm wanting to do, which is look at this story from another perspective, to take it away from what we did last week, which was that story that I heard as a child and was the story that had been there for 100 years.
Well, and I think that's the least we can do for these women. They've been
all we can do, yeah.
like they've been demonized for centuries,
right?
Like
because somebody said they were unfortunate women in 1888.
Yeah.
They spent 100 years being called prostitutes, and that doesn't actually look like it was real.
I think it's so stupid because it just goes back into the thing like, oh, you were essayed, what were you wearing? Like, just making it the woman's fault, no matter what.
So just so everybody knows, we understand that the term prostitute, the W word that we won't even say here, we understand that those are not the correct terms anymore.
And like I said in the first episode, and I'll reiterate it here, I'm using that because it is what was used in this case. It is the horrible way that people have for generations referred to these women. I am aware that that a sex worker is the appropriate term nowadays, but that is not the term that they were using. And to be honest with you, people often still use the word prostitute when they talk about this case because that's what they were called.
It's relatively a new concept.
It is.
I, for one, am for it, though.
No.
Yeah.
But I'm sticking with this because, unfortunately, and I'm going to say something here, and hopefully everyone who's listening and everybody in the room will understand what I'm saying. They have been treated for 150 years now, 140 years, as dirty prostitutes. That's how they've been treated. That's how they've been portrayed. So when I say that, it's not because that's how I see them. That's not what I believe. I'm saying that because that's what's been said. And tonight, I want to talk about that. This episode might be a little bit rough because when you open that up, I mean, I know for me, learning about these women was like an emotional thing for me because, like I said, I was very interested in this case my whole life. And to have someone say, hold on, something that in the case, your favorite case to study is totally wrong. That threw me, but it also is new evidence. It's new. It's something new to go off of. And in a 140-year-old case, if something new gets found, that's amazing. That's exciting.
Should we actually put a trigger warning on the disclaimer of this episode or in the title?
I might just do that.
I'm just wondering. Yeah.
Terms may,
Okay.
Terms used in here may offend.
Please hold. I just don't know if this is going to make a sound if I move it, so.
Oh, yes.
Oh my God.
Okay, go.
All right. So, as I said, at the time, the victims were stereotyped. And people who are obsessed with this case still debate that. They still debate whether or not these women were sex workers. Or as I'd put, prostitutes. The phrase unfortunate woman, who again, that was a slang at the time for a sex worker, it appears repeatedly. It's every single woman is referred to as that, or in the last episode, I gave you guys a list of things that they were called. The assumption that they were all prostitutes quickly became accepted as fact and stayed that way for 100 years. Newspapers repeated it. Officials repeated it. Historians repeated it. Some ripperologists defend it to this day. And for more than a century, many people stopped looking deeper. The problem is, modern research suggests that it's far more complicated. Much, much more complicated. So, Mary Ann Nichols, or Polly to her friends. She was a mother of 5, and she had once lived fairly ordinary life. She was married, she worked. Her decline into poverty was gradual. And this was pretty common at the time. Increasing poverty, increasing expense to life. Look at the way the world is now. Things got more expensive. They got more difficult. More babies made things more expensive. Though, she was a mother of 5. Can you imagine?
Nope.
And alcoholism played a role. Victorian social systems played a role. The way that women were seen at the time. The jobs they were allowed to do. So by 1888, she was simply struggling to survive. She was on the street. She was going through the lodging houses. She was drinking, but none of the evidence that was found by the historian proved or showed any actual proof that she had attempted to make a living through sex work.
I imagine, with the 5 kids, if the economy was anything like it is today.
A lot worse in some ways, and, yeah.
I can't fathom having to care for 5 other people. I can barely support myself and my significant other.
Well, and if you think about...
There probably weren't a lot of hobbies.
Well,
Still, even without the hobbies, added to everything.
Well, and I mean, you've got to also realize that it's when you're in poverty in Victorian England, your husband, what does the husband do? So let's say the husband is a dock worker. He goes down to try to get on a boat to work for the day. He's goes into a party of about 50 guys. I've read stories of them literally having fist fights. And the guy that can beat the crap out of enough of the other guys and get up to the lectern or whatever, to get up to the guy who's signing people up gets a job. If you don't kick the crap out of everybody else, your family starves, And we also talked a lot last time about why people would also drink is because there wasn't safe drinking water.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, the drinking water could kill you.
Yeah.
So next we had Annie Chapman. Annie was also married. She had children. She suffered serious health problems, including tuberculosis and other chronic illnesses. Tuberculosis is, of course, rampant at this time. People are dealing with that and they're dying from it. Remember, this is 40 years before penicillin. And, not that penicillin treats tuberculosis, but things like gonorrhea, syphilis, any illness that we do treat with antibiotics. It'd be 40 years before there was anything.
I just wanted to, not on topic, but not on topic. Was tuberculosis the 100-year sickness of that time? Because in the early 1900s we had the Spanish flu,
right? And
obviously in 2020 we had COVID.
Well, in 1920 we had a flu pandemic.
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, tuberculosis is it's the disease of the Victorian era.
Okay,
and people died from it constantly, and it's one of those things, it was so prevalent at the time, and you could go into a marketplace and somebody could cough on you and that's it.
When I was a kid, I was terrified of tuberculosis.
Same,
because
dude.
I was big into history and I would read all these books and books about the Victorian era. They were like, tuberculosis is terrible. People are dying all the time from it. And I was like, Dad, am I going to get tuberculosis and die if somebody coughs on me at school?
Oh, no, I just loved Edgar Allan Poe, and, everybody that he ever loved died of tuberculosis, and he wrote about it all the time. I'm like, oh, my God, this is going to be a huge problem in my daily life.
Annabelle Lee dies of tuberculosis at the end, yeah.
Yeah.
No, tuberculosis, there's a treatment for it.
Annabelle Lee is so good.
See, I know that now.
But it's not particularly fun. You have to do multiple treatments over.
Oh, yeah, dude.
And it basically never gets rid of the tuberculosis. It just crystallizes in your body. And
that's horrifying. That is horrifying.
Stops being contagious, but it's always there. I actually have a friend who is treated. But
that is crazy, dude.
But hey, at least it's there. I would much rather there be a treatment for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Annie Chapman, as I said, had been married and had kids. She had tuberculosis. So, of course, really, the saddest thing about this is that even if Jack the Ripper hadn't killed her, tuberculosis would have.
Yeah.
Not suggest anything there, but that's just a sadness By the time of her death, she was desperately poor, but she was also known to be intelligent and capable. She was trying to navigate her circumstances with everything stacked against her. Elizabeth Stride. So Stride may have been the victim that least fits the traditional Ripper narrative. She spoke multiple languages. She worked as a domestic servant. She'd attempted to maintain stability throughout her life. And her murder remains one of the most disputed in this entire series. Some investigators still question whether or not Jack the Ripper killed her at all in the double event. She was the first to get killed in the double event, and she wasn't mutilated in the same way. And so there was a lot of violence in Victorian Whitechapel, folks. Was it him? Or did it just happen the same night within an hour and they linked them?
My first thought was, is this like the world's first copycat killer right after the first serial killer?
Right.
Which, not the first serial killer, but the first documented,
Well, and
one of the first.
People were poor, man. And in Whitechapel, if you owed somebody money, they might kill you. She had her throat slit, but she wasn't mutilated like the other bodies. We really don't know that she was a victim of Jack the Ripper.
Also, Jason, wasn't this the youngest victim?
No, that's Mary Jane Kelly.
Okay, I apologize. Yes.
And she's the one.
I was mixing up those two as well.
Okay, thank goodness it wasn't just me.
No, this is Elizabeth Stride. So next is Catherine Eddowes. So possibly the most intellectually capable of the five. She did read and write. She was known to tell stories and entertain crowds. So, maybe she could have been a podcaster with us.
Hey.
Friends remember her humor and intelligence. She wasn't an anonymous victim. She had friends. She was brilliant. And she was way more than some unfortunate woman. Then Mary Jane Kelly. She was the youngest. She is the one who was found in her lodging house.
She was that one.
Mhm.
Yes. She's the victim we know the least about. I have heard arguments that she may have actually, worked in sex work, that she may have been the only one that really did, but I don't know that that's actually verified. There's arguments. Unfortunately, when you're talking about this age, it's difficult to prove anything. So many of the details of her life do remain uncertain, including her part in sex work, as I said. And she did have a violent boyfriend at the time that some consider a suspect. I've heard an argument that her boyfriend killed the other women in an attempt to make Mary Kelly get in line and act
That's
the way he
crazy.
wanted her to
What
be.
the heck?
And that when she didn't take the threat, that he killed her. I thought that to be a pretty weak argument.
Yeah, because
To
what did
be
he do?
honest.
Tell her about the other ones, or
Right. No. Welcome to Jack the Ripper. Everybody's going to have their own
spin?
on it. And that's why I'm trying to sort of stay away from spin.
Mm.
This is literally trying to make it as real as possible, because that's what I've done for myself, is to make this a real case, to look at it like an investigator would nowadays. So the possibility of her doing sex work, the possible violent boyfriend, some of this could be true, some of it could be legends. But unlike the others, Kelly was murdered indoors, as we said in episode 1, giving the killer the privacy he had never possessed before. I think I said something to the effect of a process killer having all the time in the world to do whatever he wanted. So those were real women. There's two things. I can't say enough how important that is, that those were real women. And this next part of the script is about victimology. What does it mean when you look at these women and you don't say they were just out in the middle of the night looking for coin and were doing things they shouldn't have been doing, so they deserved what they got, which is what people often say and perceive. That's the whole thing about saying that they were sex workers. It makes it easier. People say that they almost deserved it because they were putting themselves in danger's way. They were doing something illegal. Those are those arguments. So
does not make them deserve it in any way, shape, or form.
Oh, of course not. And people who think that way are people who are supporting the concept of the less dead. And that's people who think that, if you think that a person, I didn't like her, so I don't, so she had it coming. she comes from a certain culture, so she had it coming. If you have ever had these thoughts, please get right with God, because that is not how this works. Human beings don't deserve to be terrorized, even if they're doing something you don't like.
Ooh, they deserved it because they were dressed. They were asking.
Yeah,
for it.
they were
That
asking
kind of
for it.
bullshit. Yeah.
And I mean, that's why I just read what I read. Those women, they were moms. They were dealing with the same crushing, horrible poverty everybody else was dealing with in Whitechapel. And they deserve better. When modern investigators examine these women, several things stand out. Not prostitution, not race, not age necessarily, because of the big jump between the first 4 victims and Mary Kelly, and not really appearance, because they're all white British girls. I mean, there were a lot of white British women around. That really didn't tell them anything. But what you can pull out of this for victimology is their vulnerability. They were all living in the lodging houses. They were all struggling with some kind of alcoholism or poverty or both.
These are absolutely people that could have been missing for several days at a time and then come right back. So
Almost like somebody might have killed them thinking no one would notice or no one would care. The less dead concept existed all the way back in Whitechapel. So their vulnerability, their homelessness, their isolation, and their economic depression. If you're not saying that they were out at night doing something they weren't supposed to do and they caused it to happen to themselves, what you are saying is that maybe there was a predator out there who was looking for vulnerable, homeless, isolated, and economically challenged women who were desperate trying to survive. And that might change who you look at. A person might not say that it's likely a rich doctor if they just look at who these women really were and they start looking at who might have known who the women were, whether or not they were truly vulnerable, and might have known the streets and the alleyways so that they would know when to jump at them. I doubt a rich doctor from the upper side of London would know any of those things. But looking for rich doctors is exactly what we did. And medical students and people loved the idea of Gentleman Jack, that he was a fine fella. And he was probably from the rich side. A lot of people at the time loved that just because they liked the idea of saying that Jack the Ripper, the horrible monster, was one of them rich people over there. They kind of dug that. And that's where a lot of investigation went. But victimology, right at the beginning, is suggesting something else.
are we going to go over suspects tonight, or is this a
Next
different
time.
Is that a next
We're gonna talk
episode?
about the next episode.
Dang it, I have so many questions.
So no, we're going to talk suspects in the next one, and I have a special way that I might want to do it. I'm going to talk to you guys about it. And if I do it that way, I've never seen anybody do it before, and I'm truly excited about it.
I
It
will
also might be complicated and take forever. So
I will never remember my question for next week. So
Okay.
Write it down.
I do have I have to ask.
no, ask. Yeah, go ahead.
Unless you don't want me to.
No, please go.
Okay. So you said that they all went to these community homes and stuff like that.
Yeah, where you pay 4 pences for a bed,
Right.
And and sometimes you would sleep in a pew in a church. You could do that too if you didn't have money, and they would literally, you'd sit in the pew and they would tie you in with a rope, and everybody would sleep on top of each other.
Oh, cool.
Oh wow. So every single one of them except for the last one was outside.
Yes,
But do we know if the last woman actually owned the house that she
it wasn't a house; it was a room she had rented.
Okay, so perfect. Did anybody suspect-wise, were any of them looked at as people who run these houses?
They did look in the staff a little bit. They did look at certain staff. Did they look at everybody? No.
Okay.
And we are going to get into that in this episode.
In this episode.
We are going to talk about, we're not going to talk about the actual suspects in this episode. We're going to talk about what kinds of suspects they might have looked at if they had done victimology.
Okay.
So we'll get to that.
Okay.
As I'd said before, if we're not looking at prostitution and race and all of that, we're looking at vulnerability, homelessness, isolation, and economic depression. We're also looking at the tendency to move around at night, They were looking for money. They were looking to sell things. They were looking to work. They were telling stories, whatever they were trying to do to make money, which doesn't suggest anything. They were often moving around. They were out in the world. They were drinking. They shared circumstances. They were not necessarily, there's no actual evidence these women knew each other. They shared circumstances rather than friendships. They were part of no secret club, no criminal conspiracy, and no hidden network. They were just people down on their luck. Their connection appears to have been environmental. That's very important, because what does that suggest about the killer? That they would have had to know the environment. Whitechapel. The killer may not have been selecting any specific individual. He likely was selecting opportunities. He was an opportunistic killer. That distinction matters because it changes the type of offender police should have been seeking. Instead of asking who hated these women, who wanted them dead, a better question might have been who understood where vulnerable women could be found alone in the dark.
So wait, they weren't looking for an opportunistic killer?
That wasn't a thing back then.
Oh,
I
but
mean,
that's what I always thought it was, even with the classic story. I
Yeah.
always thought it was just a guy finding women in the dark.
So rewind back to 1888. Why do people remember 90% of murders are not serial killers?
Police are 60 years old.
99%. Yeah, they're 60
Yeah.
years old. 99% of killings are not done. So if you're a police officer in this relatively new thing, this police force, and somebody gets killed, and you walk in and you say, well, who killed this woman? Remember, 90% of the time, 70% of the time, I believe, for the actual 90% of the time is somebody she knew, and like 70% of the time it's the dude she lives with.
True.
I mean, those numbers aren't even that different now. A man dies in the street. You look around, you ask around, somebody says, well, he owed a bunch of money to somebody. Oh, we caught the killer. It's the guy he owed money to. Oh, this guy died, and you ask around a little bit, they say, well, yeah, she broke up with that guy, and now she's with this guy over here, and oh, he was upset. They fought a whole bunch. Boom. Ex-boyfriend killed her. I mean, these things are often not difficult. Not that catching killers is easy. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that there's often a pattern to follow. There's often evidence. There's often, even in Victorian England, they could ask around, find somebody who said, well, yeah, that person really didn't like them. And hey, how often do you think that was connected to their death? Pretty often.
Yep.
Which is why what they did, Victorian, remember I said they did thousands of interviews. They were desperate to find that. They knew someone was going to say, oh, yeah, that person over there hated her. And that was going to lead them to the killer. Because that's how things work a lot of the times. They didn't do a bad job. It's like I said in the last time, for Victorian England, they did a lot of work. Thousands of interviews. They flooded the streets. They had the first criminal profile. I mean, there was amazing police work that was done for 1888 Victorian England. But we got to be fair. The Metropolitan Police were operating without modern criminology. No fingerprints, no DNA, no behavioral science, no computerized records, no cell phone towers to track. If victimology had existed, investigators may have pursued different questions. They probably would have asked different questions when they did those interviews. They might have asked, hey, who is regularly moving through the multiple lodging houses in this district? Is there anybody who's following these ladies around, maybe, that you saw in all the places that they were at? They did look for that sort of thing. Remember, they're asking questions about connections. They're trying to make those connections of relationships and money, and they're not asking just, was there a creepy guy who seemed to follow them around? We know to ask that now. That was not really something they looked at back then. Who regularly moved through the districts, jumping around Whitechapel, not just these 3 lodging houses, but all over the Whitechapel district. Who worked night shifts? That's a big one.
Okay.
that they were looking, but they weren't necessarily focusing on people who worked those night shifts. And we're going to talk about there's a bunch of them. And don't get me wrong, I want to point out that the Metropolitan Police in London, they cast a huge, large net. I think I talk about it later in this episode. They actually investigated a bunch of different types of people. At one point, they even looked into police.
Oh,
They did
Wow.
they didn't do a bad job, but they didn't have victimology.
Mm.
And so who works at night? Who knew where homeless women gathered? That's a big question. If you're going around to 1,000 houses and having 1,000 conversation, and you say, "Do you know of anybody who, for some creepy reason, knows where all homeless women tend to gather?" That's a big question. Nowadays, we would ask that sort of thing because we'd be looking for stalker behavior. Who appeared regularly near lodging houses, just watching people? Who possessed occupations allowing them to wander without suspicion? A lot of those. So a lot of focus. And this is the stuff the police actually did look into. And I'm telling you, this is a great list. Butchers, slaughterhouse workers, surgeons, medical students, doctors, mortuary assistants, sailors, dock workers, carters, wagon drivers, market porters, policemen, night watchmen, and lodging house residents.
Ah.
There's the answer.
Ah. Okay.
And so that's a big net, guys. That's huge. But if they'd asked those questions I said earlier, they might have done what a modern profiler would do, examining the possible people within the victim's common activity zones. That's something you'll do with victimology is when you track the victim and you track where they are, you kind of draw a circle around the areas that they mostly go. And that's where you focus. Because a lot of times with victims of opportunity, they were found as an opportunity within the zone of their existence, within the area that they traveled. So this might have included lodging house employees, not just residents. They would have known where the women were that were the most poor, because of course poor women were coming to the lodging houses without a lot of money and getting turned away, right? They'd have to go to the church, and if the church was full, they'd have to go sleep in the street. Employees would have known those women, especially the ones who got really drunk and didn't make it a lot of the time. So they were out in the dark alone. Those employees would have known that. They would have known who was sleeping rough or who regularly was intoxicated. The staff at the local pub never investigated. These victims frequently went to the pubs. Like I said, alcoholism was a major connection. They would have had daily contact with these vulnerable women, likely many vulnerable women. And they would have also known who had nowhere to sleep, who had waited too long, and so the lodging houses were probably full. They would have known that. They would have known how drunk they were, who walked out of here stumbling. They would have known, and they would have known who might have been desperate.
this is not at all related to the episode.
Hmm.
We got our first Patreon subscriber.
Oh, sick.
What?
It's Christina.
For reals?
Yes.
Wait. Can we not? I don't know if we should be. Well, actually,
Put their names on there.
No.
Thanks to their Patreon.
So would like to.
thank you,
actually,
Christina, for having our
so
first
as
Patreon.
this is a bonus episode,
I love that.
So I just texted Goose to have him draw a doodle.
Hell
What
yeah.
doodle was it? She decide? No.
Ooh, that's crazy. That's all right.
Huh.
So other people who might have been investigated had they had victimology, workhouse employees. The Victorian workhouses processed thousands of impoverished people. Many of our victims had worked in the workhouses, and workers had direct contact with this exact population. Modern victimology would have likely examined whether or not any employee had repeatedly encountered any of the victims on multiple occasions. Charitable mission workers. Because Whitechapel contained numerous missions and shelters, charitable mission workers often moved through the streets at night, attempting to assist homeless women, drunks, and the unemployed. These workers possessed detailed knowledge of where vulnerable people congregated, of course, because they had to find them to help them. And one of these workers could have known each victim, could have helped them out, could have had conversations with them that no one would have ever known about, known where they sleep when they can't find a place to sleep. They might have worked with them multiple times. They could have known backgrounds, including, and one thing about charitable mission workers is they came to the church and they worked for the church, but who knows where they came from? They could have had any background, including knowledge of knives, knowledge of, some rudimentary knowledge of biology. This wouldn't have been the last time a killer pretended to be someone who was trying to help.
So I love the theory of that is somebody who knew all of these women. Now,
Or
if
knew of
unless
them.
well, no, the thing is like if we go back to the double night, the double event, if Jack
Did kill both of them.
did kill both of them, was the second one or the first one not as known, and that's why he was either able to find somebody that fast or
Well, I mean, so for this theory that I'm positing here, this is definitely a theory I'm offering. My theory here is that someone like one of these people that were not investigated by police, but who had this knowledge of women and knowledge of where they slept and knowledge of the districts and the alleys and all of that. So let's say he used that knowledge and he traveled the streets, he traveled the dark places until he found a woman. He killed her. And just before he's starting to do what he likes to do, that process, he gets interrupted, which is what the theory the police had, was that he was interrupted. He knows these streets. He knows these dark spaces, so he vanishes. He knows it better than they do. He vanishes easily, and within an hour, because he knows where these women are, he knows where they go, he finds another. That's the theory. And actually,
Yep. Okay.
this theory supports the double theory, the double
event.
The double event. Yeah,
Yes.
it definitely supports the double event. It doesn't mean that it actually happened. We'll talk about that in a sec, but yeah. So this might have included the next overlooked category are the gaslighters, the gas lamp lighters, forgive me. So they would walk around and they would light the gas lights and keep them lit. That was the whole point, was if one would go out, they would walk around, they would check them. The thing about it is, in Whitechapel, there weren't a lot of gas lights, but there were some. These guys not only would move around, no one would pay any attention to them, they would know where it was dark and where it was light better than anybody else.
Yeah.
They would know where people hide,
And
just outside of the lights.
these were suspects?
No, these were not.
Okay, so yeah, because you don't shit where you eat if there's not a lot of lamps to light. Absolutely.
But you're moving through the darkness between lamps, because remember, the lamps, talked about this in the last one, there's not a lot of lamps in Whitechapel. So you light one, you're going to have to go through a large dark area before you get to the next. They knew the dark areas. The last one of these potential suspects are rag and bone men. This is an overlooked category, but these men wandered the streets collecting scrap metal, rags, bottles, and bones. They did their work at odd hours, were constantly on the move, were familiar in the dark areas and the alleys. They were widely ignored by everyone, and a modern geographic profiler would likely examine them closely. For that matter, street sweepers and sanitation workers also worked those alleys, the dead-end courts, and the hidden spaces. And they could all move without drawing attention. Stable workers would also fit this profile, and straight-up criminals. So one thing I want to make sure to point out here is these people, all of these people, this large number of people moving through the streets at night, nobody paid any attention to them. No one was shocked when they saw them. If these bubbles fucking distract you bastards, I'm gonna murder you.
Love you, Jason. Sorry.
Put the bubbles away,
Wait,
children.
Wait, one more time.
Yes, I did.
Glass bubble.
No, he didn't.
Wait, where?
Excuse me.
And there's one right there too.
Where? That's awesome. Look, there's just
Jason
this
is
tiny
now
one
out of his seat.
and another tiny one.
Chasing bubbles.
Permanent bubbles. They're going to
And there's still like 3.
You know what?
Listen, this has been really heavy.
This is-
Yeah, let us have our bubbles, Jason.
From now on, I will definitely let you be Bubbles. Nice
Oh,
to meet you,
damn it.
Bubbles. So yeah, no, what I was just saying is that all of these individuals could move through the streets absolutely with no one thinking anything. You would not raise an eyebrow. You wouldn't care. The police wouldn't look at them. Literally, people wouldn't even look at these people. They were just supposed to be there, expected to be there. So Victorian police searched upward. And I know that you're still liking doctors as a potential, but they did. They searched upwards. They searched towards doctors, surgeons, medical students, men of education. They also searched with people who had jobs, like straight up jobs, like butchers and sailors and whatnot. But modern victimology frequently points to the opposite direction, toward the streets themselves, towards the men who walked Whitechapel every night without attracting notice, that would have known these women, would have known where they were, would have known where they hid, where they slept, and might have had a background where they might have known something about anatomy and knives. The men who knew the lodging houses, the markets, the docks, and the dark alleys between them. That's what modern victimology suggests.
The bad part is this is Victorian. Victorian England. Everybody had a knife.
That's the other thing.
Like it could have been anybody. I'm not just looking at doctors, and I'm not just looking at there's so many possibilities.
Well, that's the thing. When you consider how many people who were trained to hunt, how many people would have had a working knowledge of anatomy from working, you work on a ship, you wouldn't think. Why
Hunters
would
were mostly the rich.
anatomy? But what was that?
Hunters were mostly the rich.
Maybe, but
You know
there
what
were
I mean?
people who left the city to hunt for food.
Even like butchers and stuff have to have like a basic knowledge of anatomy.
And if we're to believe our profiling doctor's argument that it didn't take an extensive knowledge, then what are we looking for? My question, are we looking for someone that nobody saw? People so ingrained with this area that the police, when they were investigating, walked right by them and never even thought to ask. Because, that's just the rag and bone men. We're looking for a killer. Oh, no, don't bother him. He's doing his job. He's lighting those lamp lights. He's busy. Now, they did check a lot of people with jobs. They did. They went upwards. They didn't go.
What about alarm knockers?
There you go.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
So back in the day, they used to have people with like these long sticks, and if you paid them something, they'd knock on your window with a long stick, to like wake you up. It's an alarm clock.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh, I do. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. These are people that no one was looking at. And I would say this, in modern victimology, we look for people who it's easier for them to hide near to the victim. It's opportunity. And the opportunity is partially the victim, but it's partially the victimizer, the predator, who is among the people, and everyone sees them every day, and nobody cares. Nobody asks a question. Nobody says anything because they're always here. If they're the killer, why, they've been here for years. I know that lamplighter. I know that guy. He's been here forever. If he's the killer, why'd he just start killing now? They didn't understand that, the death of a family member, some horrible traumatic event might have triggered something that caused that killing to start in someone you see every day and you think nothing of. And in modern victimology, the predator is often someone who is in some way able to access their victim because they're able to get close to them, which means that in this case, it's somebody who's not going to get lost in the maze that was dark Whitechapel at night. I just can't argue that enough. That's what seems right to me from a victimology perspective. These were the men who could have also been Jack the Ripper, or were definitely the people Jack the Ripper had to know how to avoid to complete these killings. And this is a vital clue, because when we talk about it being a rich person, a doctor, a student, anybody who doesn't live in Whitechapel and know how to get around, the killer moved unseen. He knew where he was. He knew where they were. He knew where the dark places were. And he got to these women and he did what he did, and no one saw him. That's why I don't believe it's a doctor. I don't believe it's a medical student. I think those guys would have gotten lost. They'd have found themselves in a court that had no exit, or at least not an exit they knew where to find. And they would have been sitting there just waiting for the sun, hoping that they could find their way out before somebody catches them.
Yeah, I love that theory, but it it could have also been someone pretending to be from the slums.
But they still wouldn't have known the slums. You can pretend to be from the slums, but you've got to know these alleys. Whitechapel was a maze, dude. It was a maze, and it was dark. This whole like murder by gaslight, that's a misnomer. There were very few gaslights. There were some, but there were long stretches and the alleyways and the courts that were pitch black. You had to know where you were. You just had to. And I just don't think that anybody they were looking at, I mean, actually, that's not fair, because I mean, like, police officers were moving through these streets and knew the streets and could move and walk around, and nobody was paying attention to them either. I mean, they did look for people who fit this profile. I'm not saying that they didn't. I just gave you a list, as long as my arm, of people they didn't look at.
Yeah.
And that's what victimology tells us. Victimology tells us if they're prostitutes and they're going into these places and they're getting themselves in trouble, quote unquote, and they're a known quantity, yes, a person can come from the upper city to have their fun in Whitechapel and get an unfortunate woman and pay her to go to a dark place. And she tells him where to go. This is some theories that people have had. She knows the area. She tells him where they can go to be alone. She takes him there. He kills her. He goes back the way he came to exit. And that's how he gets away with it. That's been a theory. It's theory, and I'm not, but the moment these women aren't prostitutes, the minute these women are not being paid to go to dark places with the strange man from out of this area, the moment they're entertainers and housewives, that falls apart. And the question becomes, who could it have been? And it's not the rich guy, because why is she taking the rich guy? Why is she taking the upper city guy into a dark place? The question, if they're not prostitutes, is who's the killer? And the likelihood is no one we've looked at. So, other victims. Let's talk about the canonical five. At the time, the medical surgeons and the investigations that were done strongly suggested that these killings were all connected. Even the double event, the way the throat was sliced, it was consistent with the other victims. The reason the canonical victims are seen as the likely five victims of Jack the Ripper is because we believe that they were all killed by the same person. That's a big part of this. That it was one person committing these crimes and that they were all killed by him. That's where and if we have to kind of accept that, and that's true, and that they did a good enough job to know. And there were some great surgeons. We talked about the one from last time. There were some very smart surgeons who did analyze this case and did determine the police were correct and that these five victims were connected. But were they the only ones?
How many doctors did the autopsies on these women?
That's the thing, is that you're talking about police surgeons.
Okay.
And I know of at least 3.
Okay.
I actually haven't researched that. Thank you for that.
I have
look into now.
I have a series of questions.
Yeah.
That would determine whether the person was facing them, behind them, if they're
Right.
left-handed or right-handed,
Right.
according to the cuts.
And those were things that they could determine. I know that they determined that those things were all consistent with
Okay.
a single event.
That's what actually caught my attention
Right.
when you said that.
That's a big part of it. And all of the police surgeons, they did determine that those sorts of indicators, which they did know how to look for at the time, were consistent. That it was, a person who cut
how the blood
right-handed, and
fell,
Mhm.
whether they were standing up or laying down already.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while, but my understanding is they were standing. Their throats were
So
slit.
straight down,
Right.
not to the
And
back.
the belief was likely that the person was wearing black so that the blood wouldn't show. That's a
Black is a rich person's color, though. A lot of grays, a lot of tans, a lot of
yeah. But if I'm going to kill a bunch of
mute.
people, I might, you know.
Yeah, like he was obviously this person probably
But you
wasn't
gotta
wearing a
remember,
suit.
The theory is that the person was wearing black so that they wouldn't have blood on them. But you know what I would have done if I was in Whitechapel and I was a bone and rag man and I was killing these women? Got myself a leather apron.
Oh, that's true.
And I would have put that leather apron on when I went to kill them. And when I walked away, people would have said, "Going home, butcher?"
So now,
Not a word.
we're going into the leather apron theory.
Well, and I'm not opposed to the leather apron theory. You know, that's one of the theories I think we'll probably talk about in the next episode when we're talking suspects.
Right.
What I'm saying is that
You can tell me if I'm asking too many
I
questions.
know you're fine.
I'm sorry.
My thing is, person walking around covered in blood. One, it's night, it's Whitechapel, and they know these streets. They know where the dark places are, and they know how to get around. You don't have to have black clothes on if you just stay in the black places.
Yeah.
Or you put on an apron and you walk through the streets like it's nothing. So the place I'm going to is not verified. I'm only going to do 3 of the potential other victims. There are more. If you would like to go down a number of rabbit holes yourselves and talk and look at all the different potential possible ones, start asking yourself if the torso murderer was connected to Jack the Ripper. Oh yeah, another serial killer at the time who left torsos only. And there was a potential.
Who is first?
Look, I didn't do research on the torso murderer at this point. It's been a while. But I'm just saying, Jack the Ripper wasn't the only serial killer because somebody cutting heads and arms and legs off and leaving just torsos. But these are 3 of the most likely other victims of Jack the Ripper. And there's one in specific that I'm very interested in. And just writing this has made me want to do some research and look at this one. So the first one's name is Martha Tabram. She was killed August 7th, 1888. She was stabbed a dozen times, but with no throat cutting, no organ removal, and no obvious mutilation pattern. However, this happened before the canonical 5.
Okay, that was my next question.
So some researchers believe she might have been the Ripper's first victim. It makes sense that after this killing, he might have added or evolved the torture. Maybe killing her did something he wanted, but it didn't do everything he wanted. So the cutting and the organ removal could have been escalations, which we all know serial killers often escalate, and sometimes their modus operandi will also modify as they go. Killers often increase their violence as they kill. And I think it's likely she could be a victim or maybe even the first victim. And if she was the first, there's a possibility that she could be the only victim with direct ties to the real Ripper. Because, and not always, don't get me wrong, there are times that people want to kill their mom and they kill a whole bunch of other people and never kill their mom. It's all representations of mom or of ex-girlfriend. For instance, Ted Bundy killed a lot of women who looked like his ex-girlfriend, never killed her. There is also some research and some history within investigative work that suggests that the first victim may be tied to the actual victimizer, the predator themselves. So if a killer's first victim is often closer or more important to the killer, does that mean that this person could give us information that we haven't looked at?
Remind me, with the canonical 5, did he stab them that many times?
No, but he slit their throats and then he went straight to the mutilization.
Because in a lot of cases, if it's someone that they were closer to, that they had more emotion toward, there's a lot more chance
that frenzied
of multiple stabs like that, and it says stabbed a dozen times, dozens of times.
So yeah, if this was his first victim and he was frenzied, stabbed her a whole bunch, and then he decided to continue doing this, modifying that, again, like you said, if it's a crime of passion, Crimes of passion sometimes involve that. We talked about, in the Girls' Night episode, we talked about the frenzied attack that Jodi Arias did
Yeah.
on her victim, Travis Alexander. Stabbing him, how many times was it? Like 23 times?
Yeah, I
and
think it
shooting him in
was.
the head.
Yeah,
Yep.
something like that.
It was, sometimes when you're connected to that person, that frenzy happens. And then if you continued on killing, maybe you would modify because you're not frenzied anymore. I'm not saying that this is true. I'm saying that she was killed with a knife right before the 5 canonical victims began dying, and that it's compelling. So Alice McKenzie, in July of 1889, the next year, she was found with throat wounds and abdominal injuries. Sounds familiar?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Several senior investigators believed that she might be a later Ripper victim, but there were arguments and the injuries were kind of limited, and this one's heavily debated, and it is suggested he could have also been interrupted because it doesn't look like it was completed, but
It's similar enough. I wouldn't just.
I wouldn't dismiss it. And
Dismiss it,
there's
yeah.
another thing, and there's a big reason I think that Alice McKenzie is not part of the canonical 5. It's the next year. They had told people it was over.
And
He'd
so they
stopped
didn't wanna-
killing. It had gone in the papers. No one. We still haven't found him, but they had released that this was over by this point
And
because
they
he
didn't
hadn't
want to
killed.
scare the public by saying he was back.
He hadn't killed in months, and I mean, I'm sure that the newspapers would love to say that, but I imagine the police would say, well, it's not exactly the same. If it is the Ripper, he didn't finish, and maybe it's not. Maybe he was, interrupted, but I think they kind of pushed this away. It's not because it wasn't consistent with the Ripper, but because it was inconvenient to have another victim. However, in February of 1891, so this is a couple years later now, 88's when it started, we're now 3 years later, Frances Coles had her throat cut before the attacker apparently fled. Some contemporaries believe that the Ripper was attempting, maybe after a cooling off period, to return and may have fled. He ran away after he cut this woman's throat. So it's hard to know for sure because he didn't get to finish. But some suggest that this was also the Ripper, but the others disagree because he didn't mutilate the body as he ran away. But, to this day, no consensus exists on any of these 3. However, all 3 happened within a window. The other 2 could suggest cooling off periods and returns to attempts to kill, which we know is very common in serial killer behavior. And if these were Jack's victims, you have to ask, how many more could there be? And I think that's something that police didn't really want to ask at the time.
Okay, so the last one you just talked about.
Frances Coles.
What month was that?
February of 1891.
Okay, and when did the killings of the canonical 5 happen? In what months?
That was, I believe, August of 1888, or July or August. Yeah.
Okay, so
August
there's not
of 88.
really
So it's 3 years, 3
years
not
and 3
quite
months.
3 years later.
3 years and 4 months.
Well, February of 1891 versus August, so it's like 2 years
Yeah.
and 10 months. Or
Yeah, I don't know.
2 years and 10 months.
I was looking for a
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're looking for connection.
I'm
and
looking.
You're not the only one. The madness will come.
Okay.
Keep trying. Because that's what this was.
I could go mad trying to do this,
This
that,
case, oh yeah, no. And people have. That's, like I said, I've been doing this for years, and here I am doing a podcast.
The Ripper
now.
sickness.
It's not. So the question becomes, what if the canonical 5 are wrong? What does that mean? So the canonical 5 may not actually be 5. I just added 3, and that makes 8. Some modern historians generally agree on the 5 because their murders form a coherent pattern, but reality doesn't obey categories.
The double event also could have been a copycat, or it could have
Or
been
it just could
something
have been
else.
Street violence.
Yeah. Yeah. It just had to be coincidental that somebody else was also being murdered at approximately the same time.
Well, that's the thing. If Martha Tabram belongs, if she's a killer, if she was killed by Jack the Ripper, the killer's whole evolution changes because we have a frenzied first attack. So the entire evolution of his killings changes. If Elizabeth Stride was not killed by Jack the Ripper in the double event, if that was just street violence, the double event changes. It's not a double event now. If Alice Mackenzie belongs, the timeline changes. If Francis Cole belongs, the ending changes. He's running away. It shows that cooling off period. The truth is that historians have created the canonical five because they represent the most probable grouping, not because any certainty exists. And certainty is something that this case rarely provides.
Was there any talk of any like travel or okay, so it didn't happen in Whitechapel, but it happened like 3 towns over, or it happened, you know what I mean? Like could it have been?
We can talk about the theory people have that H.H. Holmes, who did go to London during the Ripper killings at one point, his own great grandson said that he believes that H.H. Holmes was also Jack the Ripper. I have issues with that because the modus operandi is very different. H.H. Holmes mostly killed with gas and poisoning, not mutilation.
He didn't get up close and personal. Like
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper.
So I don't believe that. I don't think that's right, but it's there. You know, that's one thing. That's what I just said. We're going to talk about in another episode of just our regular show. We're going to talk about Thomas Crean. There are theories that he is another suspect of the Ripper cases, but again, poisoner, not mutilator. But he was there. He was a doctor. He was in Whitechapel at the time, and he is a murderer. So there you go. You know, and because they were looking for doctors, these things come up. But like I said, I'm not looking for doctors. I'm looking for something else. I think that we made a huge mistake when we suggested that Jack the Ripper was a man from uptown who came downtown, paid a prostitute who took him into the dark, and then he murdered her. I think that was a really easy story. I don't think it was the real story because the historians' work shows that those victims were not what they said they were. You change victimology, you change the investigation. Period. Any investigator will tell you that. So imagine Whitechapel, not as a stage for a famous killer, but as a neighborhood, a crowded, poor, noisy living community. Imagine a man moving through those streets. This man understands the lodging houses, the pubs, the alleys, the shortcuts. He knows exactly where desperate women spend their time and their nights. He's just common, poor himself. Not as poor as his victims, but he's there. He watches, he waits, he learns, and nobody looks at him. He knows what he wants to do. He knows which women sleep rough more often and where, which walk alone, seem to have no one who care about them, and seem to have nowhere safe to go. Then one by one, he exploits the vulnerabilities. Not because he knows them, but because he understands their world and wants to possess them. Just for a time, just to get what he needs. Then one day he stops. Does he die? Leave London? Enter an asylum? Does he grow old? Get sick? Does the poverty of Whitechapel catch up to him? Does he live among his neighbors who never knew what he'd done, who he was, but who all remember Jack the Ripper? Perhaps history should remember something else. Martha, Mary, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, Mary, Alice, and Frances. Because they weren't just victims. They weren't prostitutes who had it coming. And he doesn't deserve to be the only thing we remember. And that's it, folks. Next time, we're going to leave Victorian London's ideas behind, because we're going to get obsessed with this modern investigation of Jack the Ripper.
Ooh, yeah.
We're going to talk about the modern investigations, the journalists, the authors, the detectives, the profilers. We're going to go through suspects. Some are plausible, some bizarre, some famous, some infamous. Most of them absolute bullshit.
Yeah.
And some of the potential killers became so popular that people have come to believe the case has already been solved. Which one, you might ask? Walter Sickert? That story gets weird. Aaron Kosminski? Proven by DNA? Next time on Part 3 of Jack the Ripper. Until then, keep your lantern lit, watch the shadows, and thank you for joining us here at the Arkins Hearth.
Okay.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Good night.